You are listening to KSG Podcast. This is a short, crisp, concise, exam-oriented, edited editorial for civil services aspirants. In this podcast, we are going to talk about what forced labor means for India. Source for the content is Sachi Satapathy's article for Deccan Herald. The number of people caught up in forced labor or forced marriages ballooned by 10 million between 2016 and 2021. In other words, 1 out of every 150 people in the world is caught up in modern forms of slavery, says the latest International Labour Organization or ILO report, Global Estimate of Forced Labor. According to the ILO report, migrant workers are more than 3 times as likely to be affected by this form of slavery. The report further estimates that there are 22 million people in forced marriages, more than two-thirds of them women, and many of the victims are under 15 when the marriage takes place, putting them at greater risk of sexual exploitation and violence. The overwhelming majority of forced marriages, more than 85%, were driven by family pressure, with most cases occurring in Asia and the Pacific and across the Arab states. With this global picture coming to light, it is extremely important to understand how, why, and what makes India most vulnerable to this modern day slavery, particularly in the context of forced marriage. The data of the Fourth Periodic Labour Force Survey (PLFS 2022), released by the National Statistical Office, that is NSO, the Government of India estimates that the migration rate in the country is at 28.9%. This figure is concerning as female migration is much higher than male, and the main reason for migration is found to be marriage. Further, the latest National Family Health Survey data gives more clarity on why India is more vulnerable to child marriage, that is, forced marriage. As per NFHS 5 data, 48% of girls with no education were married below 18 years of age, as compared to only 4% among those who attained higher education. The analysis of the NFHS 5 further shows that a staggering 40% of the girls from the lowest quintile were married before they turned 18. The NFHS 5 data further says that 8 Indian states have a higher prevalence of child marriage than the national average. Among them, West Bengal, Bihar, and Tripura top the list, with more than 40% of women aged 20 to 24 years married below 18, and the other 5 states include Jharkhand, Assam, Andhra Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Telangana. One can link the indicators of the ILO's Global Estimate of Forced Labor report data, which shows fears that migrant girls are most vulnerable to forced slavery globally. As per a poll conducted by UNICEF on International Women's Day 2022, it was reported that at least 38% of respondents knew of a girl who had dropped out of school, while 33% of respondents said that the girls who had dropped out of school were engaged in domestic work, and 25% of respondents reported that the girls who had dropped out had gotten married. According to the Unified District Information System for Education Plus, the annual dropout rate for secondary level education in India stands at 14.6%. The figure for dropouts at the secondary level was as high as 17%, and UDISE Plus says that the gross enrollment ratio of girls decreased from 96.72 in elementary classes to 76.93 in secondary classes and to 50.84 in higher secondary classes. According to the Indian Education Ministry, school closures in India affect 320 million children enrolled from primary to tertiary levels of education. It has been estimated that of these, about 158 million are girls. The panel has recommended government incentives to encourage more girls to continue their schooling and learning with measures like targeted scholarships, conditional cash transfers, provision of bicycles, access to smartphones, and hostel facilities. It suggested urgent and concerted efforts to mobilize the return of girl students to schools and sustain their regular attendance. So far, there is no news or data from the government on what steps were taken to get these children back to school, as this group will be the most vulnerable to being moved into forced slavery or forced marriage. Every single data point, whether it is government, UN, or civil society organizations, leads to one conclusion. India is most vulnerable to forced slavery, particularly in the context of forced marriage or child marriage. This situation can be avoided, particularly by the efforts of state and central governments, civil society organizations, and media, through a new policy on bringing back girls who dropped out of schools back into the education system as a priority. That's it for this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. To join KSG India courses and to crack the IELTS exam, visit ksgindia.com. You can also get a PDF of this podcast on ksgindia.com. Thanks for listening.